Yeah.
How did you get involved and why? Why did you say, here's a guy who's going to take a boat halfway around the world, I'm in?
Yeah, this is kind of a crazy story. So I knew Philip from a few years prior, and now the voyage started in 2019, but I knew Philip from a few years prior because he had published a book called Sailing Close to the Wind. And that was his first book, and it detailed the first expedition that he did in this Phoenicia ship. And it actually left from Salalah, Oman, which interestingly is where we consider Nephi built his original ship.
Where Bountiful or wherever they were. Okay.
Yeah, right in that region.
So he just happened to leave from there.
Happened to leave from there. He has no awareness that there was any connection at that stage.
And what was his destination?
And his destination was to circumnavigate Africa.
Okay, because you got to go down around the Horn of Africa to even begin thinking about heading further west.
West, yeah. But his goal was to get around Africa, which was to prove the words of Herodotus, who in 500 BC wrote that Emperor Necho II, which was a pharaoh actually of Egypt, hired the Phoenicians to sail around the great continent, and that was just put out there by Herodotus. There was no evidence that it actually ever happened. And so Philip, in his way, decided he was going to set out to see if he could make that happen. So I was distributing his book here in the States.
Okay, there's the connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had that connection with him. We had gone back and forth with email a few times. And then he sent me a note and said that he was planning to take the same ship and cross the Atlantic to America, which was a whole new concept.
Okay, so to begin where? Same place, Oman?
No, this time it will begin in the Mediterranean. Because, again, when you go back to look at the Phoenician civilization, their strongholds were all within the Mediterranean sphere.
Right, okay.
Right? Sidon, Tyre, they're two founding cities, which, by the way, are mentioned in the Bible quite a bit. And the cities of Sidon and Tyre.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of people ask, in fact, this is a little aside here, a lot of people say, well, if the Phoenicians were such a big deal back in biblical times, how come we never read about them in the Bible? And the reason for that is because they're not called Phoenicians in the Bible. They're actually referred to as Canaanites.
When you read, you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and even if you weren't, if you read the Book of Mormon, but you are and you do, what is it different to you now when you read those chapters and you read about the people, the Jaredites and the Mulekites and Lehi and Nephi and those that...
Scott, I'm going to do a scripture shift on you, because what I really had an epiphany about was Jonah and his experience.
Okay.
So if you look up Jonah and the whale, it turns out Jonah was sailing on a Phoenician vessel. This happened at this was right around 700 BC, I believe. And he was sailing from Joppa, which is the coast of Israel, and he was sailing to Tarshish, which is modern-day Cadiz, Spain.
Cadiz.
Yes.
Is it really?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
That is Tarshish.
I did not know that.
It's a 2,500-mile journey from Joppa to Tarshish, or to Cadiz. And he was on that voyage, and a tremendous storm came up on the Mediterranean. And ultimately, he was the victim to go over, and all of that came to me. It was only afterward that I really put all this together and realized there was no whale.
I was going to say.
No. So I just had that reality really hit me in a major way. I mean, the scriptures are not just stories. They're actually real things that happen to real people. That was one of the things that really struck me. I believe that this expedition was a replay of Mulek's voyage.
Oh, really? So Nephi didn't build his boat after the manner of man. That wouldn't have been this one that we're talking about.
But it was built out of hewn timbers.
Okay.
Right? So we knew it was built out of wood, basically.
Right.
It was a wooden vessel. And we don't know exactly what Nephi's ship was like. It was obviously a well-constructed vessel. But what's interesting is that the Phoenicians had been at it for over 1,000 years, perfecting their art and their technology.
Right.
And what we learn in Omni is that Zedekiah had sons. And Zedekiah, of course, was the king in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
at the time of the siege when the Babylonians came in. And what happened is, we learned that Zedekiah was captured and his sons in Byblos were all brought there, and they were murdered in front of Zedekiah. It was the last thing he saw, because then they put out his eyes and kept Zedekiah alive and took him back in chains to Babylon as a witness that he had no heirs to the throne. And that was a big deal. The Babylonians were very concerned about some party rising up and claiming heirship to the throne and causing a revolution. So they made sure there were no descendants left of Zedekiah's. Now, what's really interesting is in the Book of Mormon, we learn what the Bible doesn't know, that there was one son who escaped. And in my book, I'm suggesting that the reason he escaped, first of all, Zedekiah was 31 years old. He's not an old man. These aren't like adult sons. These are children, basically.
Right.
And so his youngest son, we will call Mulek, that would be his youngest son, I believe, escaped in the womb of his mother, undetected by the Babylonians, unknown to anybody, probably other than his mother.
And so that's the Mulek that then eventually sails.
Yeah, so Hugh Nibley tells us that Mulek, the name itself, means little king or dear little king. It's an term of endearment about a king. And so we know he was young. How young, we don't know. But had he been born, that would have been a matter of record, and the Babylonians would have tracked him down.
Yeah.
So I think that he probably had not been born. His mother had been able to escape before the siege. And then in Omni it says that they traveled through the wilderness and then were carried across the seas to the promised land. So there's no talk about building a ship. They were carried.
So these would have been ships that were already?
That's my conclusion. Is that and she's a queen, so she has means, resources, an entourage, no doubt helping her. So she's able to go and buy passage, if you will, on a Phoenician ship and say, take me to where the Lord's sending us.
Yeah.
And clearly what's really amazing to me about this is you go back to Genesis 49, verse 10, where Israel is giving the blessings to his sons, and one of them to Judah, he blesses him that the scepter shall never depart from thee. And the Jews have always assumed that that meant that the kingship would continue, which it did, from the Davidic line down through. Well, Zedekiah ended that, but in the Lord's economy, it didn't end with Zedekiah. He took the youngest son and brought him to another promised land and placed him.